So my name is Jennifer Gold. I work for Fish and Wildlife OSPR. I'm located in the Santa Barbara office. So my areas of responsibility include Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, and then also the northern Channel Islands, including San Miguel, Santa Rosa, Santa Cruz, and Anacapa. And today I'm going to be going through the technique of Shoreline Cleanup Assessment. So we're going to be going over a good amount of information pretty quickly, but then we'll be able to use this information and apply it when we go outside today. So I wanted to also mention too, in your student manual, it's on section 14. In the back, behind the PowerPoint, there is a SCAT summary job aid with 2 pages that you can use to follow along with this talk. There's a lot of different requirements that we'll be looking at, so hopefully it'll make it a little bit clearer when we go through this talk. And then we'll be using the SCAT summary handout at the end of this presentation to do a little bit of an exercise. And then there's also a SCAT data sheet that we actually use to collect shoreline oiling information. So first off, the Shoreline Cleanup Assessment Technique team includes 3 to 4 individuals. The first individual is a federal representative, usually from the U.S. Coast Guard, but this position can also be filled by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, or National Park Service, any other federal trustee, or for instance, in the Deepwater Horizon spill, this position was filled by a NOAA representative. In California, the state representative will be filled by California Fish and Wildlife OSPR employee, and then the third position will be filled by the responsible party. If there are any cultural or historic properties that could be impacted by a spill, an archaeologist will fill the 4th position on this cleanup assessment technique team. And then you can have multiple teams throughout the response, but there will be at least 3 to 4 individuals on each team. So the question comes up, what is actually SCAT? And SCAT is not a scientific study, but it's a systematic survey of the impacted shoreline to fill the valuable data input of where is the oil. It provides input on the sensitive resources that could be impacted by a spill, and SCAT also provides cleanup recommendations to the operation unit to fulfill. So why would we want to use SCAT? SCAT provides a good overview, a good snapshot of the response progress, and it identifies the shoreline conditions to the unified command. And then all the SCAT information is collected up into maps that are created by the Geographic Information System unit. So here's the picture of the unified command structure. And the SCAT teams are technical specialists that are found underneath the planning section in the environmental unit. So there are many challenges with SCAT. The first one is just being able to gain access to the impacted shoreline. Safety is the #1 priority during a response. So if it is not safe to access the shoreline, these segments will not be surveyed. It is also important to not overly disturb and stress. Yeah, you're. Oh, excited. example, high numbers of roosting birds in areas that are nesting, because you do not want to overly disturb these populations if you cannot. So you might not also survey an area that has been impacted because of these wildlife populations. A good example in my area of responsibility that would be difficult to survey if a spill occurred in this area would be Point Conception, which the lighthouse is owned by the U.S. Coast Guard, but then there's private property from the east and west of the shoreline. And then it would be really difficult to get down to the shoreline to actually see if there's oiling along this habitat type. So it is important to differentiate wildlife operations team from the Shoreline Cleanup Assessment Technique teams. The SCAT teams do not perform wildlife ops, but they do observe oiled wildlife in the vicinity. They will note it or report it to the Wildlife Operations Unit, but they will not go out and collect the oiled animals. The wildlife operations will do this. They are in charge of reconnaissance, recovery, transportation, and the rehabilitation of injured wildlife. SCAT teams also do not conduct natural resource damage assessments. These two teams work independently of each other. The natural resource damage assessment teams conduct more in-depth investigations to the impacts of natural resources from the spill of oil, but the natural resource damage assessment teams can use the SCAT data to find out where exactly they want to conduct their more in-depth investigation. And throughout California, there are over 20 trustee councils that have been formed from past larger spills by conducting these natural resource damage assessments. I presently work on the Torch Trustee Council that's from a spill from 1997 off the coast of Vandenberg Air Force Base from Platform Irene. So then exactly what is SCAT? What are we talking about? SCAT teams, they have a lot of ground to cover. They move very quickly. They can use local properties, local, state, and federal trustees to gain information about access points and resources in the area. If there are cultural or historic properties that could be impacted by a spill, an archaeologist will be on this team. SCAT determines four main data gaps. They determine where is the oil, what type of oil is being impacted, what is the length, the width, the depth, the type of oil, the percent distribution of oiling, what are the resources that could be impacted by a spill, and this could include environmental, economic, and cultural resources. And then lastly, SCAT gives cleanup recommendations to operations unit. It's important to know that SCAT drives operations. They will monitor the effectiveness of the chosen cleanup actions, and if it's decided that the chosen cleanup actions are not being as effective, these cleanup actions will be revised so the most efficient and best cleanup actions are being utilized during a spill response. So my coworker, Mr. Ruiz, has already gone through this idea of our different shoreline types throughout California. There are 10 different shoreline types throughout California. Type 1, exposed rocky shoreline. This habitat type will be the least impacted by an oil spill. It'll be easiest to remove oil from this shoreline. You probably won't be removing oil from the shoreline. The waves would naturally remove the oil from the shoreline. Moving up through the scale, type 5, which is mixed sand and gravel beaches, and type 6, which is coral beaches, will be moderately impacted by an oil spill, and it will be moderately difficult to remove oil from these habitat types. And then lastly, up at the top, type 10, which is salt marsh, will be the most significantly impacted by There are 6 surface oiling descriptors for thickness that range from no oil to pooled oil, which is over 1 centimeter thick. There are surface oiling distributions that range from no oil to continuous oil. And then during the summer months, sand will deposit onto beaches, and if there's oiling zones on the sand, it can be easily become buried underneath the sand, and it can be easy to have subsurface oiling go unnoticed. The greater the substrate porosity, the greater the oil will penetrate down into the substrate. So, for example, there'll be greater oil penetration for cobble beaches compared to fine to medium grade sand beaches. So there are 7 surface oiling descriptors, range from no oil to partially filled oil to oil-filled pores. And then when you're doing your SCAT surveys, the question comes up of, would you rather have one fractured zone? As you see, there's 3 bands of oil along this beach, or would you rather have 3 oiling zones? And I would recommend to just have the one fractured zone. It simplifies the situation, and cleanup operations can bring the same amount of people. It wouldn't really change the situation if you had 3 fractured zones. And I try to just simplify the situation in oil spill response. Here's our data sheet we'll be using this afternoon. It has very straightforward information. It's important to include if there's no oiling along a segment, and then the SCAT form or the sketch form is important information to complete that includes obvious landmarks and hazards, trench and access locations. So during a spill response, the impacted shoreline is divided up into manageable segments, and these segments are grouped together by similar shoreline types, and they're about 1 mile long. And throughout the oil spill response, SCAT is involved throughout the whole entire response, starting with the reconnaissance surveys, continuing on with the field inspection surveys, and then concluding with the cleanup process. And if there's one thing to get out of this talk, is that SCAT drives operations, and SCAT gives the cleanup recommendations to the operations unit. So just going over real quickly, there are 4 main types of cleanup recommendations that can be conducted on the shoreline. They include natural remediation, and just allowing the oil to weather on its own. Passive removal is laying out adsorbent materials to allow natural processes to move oily water through these collection materials. And then there's also physical removal, which can include hand crews, manual removal, and then also using mechanical removal to remove oily substrates. And then lastly, there's applied response technology, which includes in-situ burning, bioremediation, and dispersants. And the question that I always think of when picking the cleanup recommendation for a site is, should we just leave the oil in place, or are cleanup actions causing more damage than if we just leave the oil in place? You really don't want to create a bigger mess and more damage to the environment, or cultural resources, or economic. So we're going to be using the job aids in your student manual and your job aid handout. We're going to be filling out this handout with the responses. We're going to go through 5 oiling scenarios to try to get a better idea of what we're looking at. So I'm hoping to get a little bit of audience participation when we go through this. So we're first going to go through type of oil this is. And I was thinking we could just like go down the line and go around the room, and if you could offer up any ideas. So what type of oil, if you look on your job summary, job aid, the type is listed first, and we could go from no observed oil up to the asphalt pavement. So on the end, what would you think this type would be of oil that we have on the beach?
Just from looking at it, or tar patties?
Tar patties, that's a good idea. This is a little bit fresher, just kind of just happened, so I would just say it's fresh oil. It's hard to kind of decide on the picture. But, so our next one, thickness. Our thickness goes from no oil to pooled oil. You have an idea?
Pooled oil.
Yeah, I was thinking pooled oil for this one. So our next on our distribution, and what's good about the distribution is you just have to pick the categories, you don't have to pick a specific percent covered. So,
Patchy.
patchy, I believe it's Apache, so yes. And then what is our shoreline type we're dealing with here? Our shoreline type is on the second page of the job aid, or the back side of it.
Fine to medium sand beaches.
Yes, fine to medium grain sand beaches. And then our cleanup recommendations. What if we had this little patch of oil on a beach? We could, if we want to continue along here. So I was thinking manual removal and just having hand crews come out and remove the soil. If it was like a long strip of oil along the beach, miles and miles, we might think about some mechanical equipment coming out on the beach. But if it's just a small little area, we could have a few guys come out on the beach and collect the oil. So looking at our next oiling scenario, we have this creek that has some oil in it. So what type of oil are we looking at? I think we're going to go down this front row if we want to. So we're kind of saying moose. It could be moose if the spill just happened. It would more be fresh, but it would be moose if the oil has been emulsified, has water built up in it. Our thickness, I'm going to go this. So we're going no oil up to pooled oil.
Coat.
Might be coat. I was thinking more cover for this one. So our distribution, our next one, it's pretty thick.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So we're just looking at a picture, but if we were actually on the shoreline and we're using our tools to maybe take some measurements and things like that.
You would more be able to see how thick it is, what we're dealing with.
Okay.
This is just to get a first idea of how to deal with this stuff. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Broken, like around 80%. It's pretty thick there. And then our shoreline type, yeah, fine to medium grain sand beaches. And then our cleanup recommendations. Yeah, absorbents, passive. With this response technology, we can combine two different types of cleanup actions, having the manual removal with the cleanup crews, and then they're using the sorbent pads back there doing the physical removal, and then having the pom-poms at the end of the creek doing passive removal, and allowing the water, oily water to move through the collection materials to pick up any water. So at this oiling scenario, we have this band of oil up here. So if we're looking at, we want to just continue around dawn, we're looking at, what was that? Oh, we're looking at type. So what type? Yeah, I heard tar patties. There's a big tar patty there. Our thickness. Peter?
Yeah. That's probably between stain and coat.
Yeah, I think I said cover. It's kind of hard to tell if you're not there and how much sand is built up in the oil, how thick it is. Our distribution, I said broken at 50%. I was just looking at this one band here and just taking this one couple foot band here, going at 50%. And this is also a good point to bring up that when a spill happens, the SCAT team members and leaders and the whole group will go out on a calibration field trip, and we'll go like, how much oil would this be? How much oil would this be? So we all get a pretty good idea of what percentage cover we're all calling the same. So we kind of calibrate it so someone's not calling it completely different than someone else. The shoreline type, yeah, yes. And then our cleanup recommendation, yeah, physical, manual, having hand crews come out there, clean up the oil. Now this is our other fourth oiling scenario. We have this line of oil here. So what type of oil we're looking at? Tar balls. Our thickness is kind of hard to tell with the picture, but Dustin?
Let's go with the cooled oil, I guess, because they're holding one step here, right?
Yeah, it's but it's more mixed up with sediment, so it's not all complete oil. So I said cover on this. Our distribution that we're looking at here,
Sporadic.
yeah, it's at about 10% tar balls going off here. And then our shoreline type,
One medium or coarse. Great sand.
yeah,
Mixed sand and gravel.
5 to medium grade sand beaches. And then our cleanup recommendations, we could be using manual hand crews to go out, remove the oil. So then looking at our last oiling scenario, what type of oil do we have here? Yeah, I've been hearing moose. So the oil is emulsified with water. And then our thickness is hard to tell again because it's a picture. I think it was a little bit thicker than that. I said cover. Our distribution, just along this. I said patchy at 20%. That might be a little high. Maybe like 10% might be a little bit better to look at. And then our shoreline type we're looking at here. It's a little hard to tell by the picture, but it's a salt marsh habitat. And then so for our cleanup recommendations in salt marsh habitat, I would want to do natural remediation. it would cause a lot of damage to the salt marsh to have crews, or we couldn't really do mechanical equipment here. But you just want to try to keep the oil on the top so it can naturally degrade and not get pushed down into the sediment. So then finally, the cleanup endpoint document is drafted by the environmental unit. It is drafted early on in the response, so it's clear how much cleaning will have to be done for a segment to be signed off on, and for a spill process to be complete. And then this document is signed at the end of the response by the unified command, and the SCAT teams will go out to the sites to ensure these cleanup endpoints are being met. And if they are not, cleaning crews will be asked to go back out to these sites. And then finally, even if we sign a segment off and a responsible party's oil comes back up on the beach or more oil is found, the segment can be opened up for more cleaning, and the responsible party will still be liable for the cleanup of the oil. So here's my contact information.